Wendy Ulrich, Dr. Wendy Ulrich, was a psychologist in Ann Arbor, Michigan for 20 years before moving to Montreal, Quebec for a recent completed 3-year mission, and that's where I met her and her husband. She has served as president of the Association of Mormon Counselors and Psychotherapists, has authored numerous professional articles in both psychology and business, and has done consulting and training for such corporations as Marriott, Johnson & Johnson, University of Michigan, General Electric, and United Way. Dr. Ulrich is founder of 16 Stone Center for Growth in Alpine, Utah, providing seminar retreats for LDS members seeking personal and spiritual growth and development. She and her husband have 3 children. Her talks are always well worth it, and so please welcome Dr. Wendy Ulrich.
So hopefully you've had a few minutes to consider the questions on page 1 that look like this. And let me explain number 6 just a little if you're wondering what the heck I'm talking about. What I mean by that is just the ordinary frustrations that you experience as a child. So my parents made me go to bed when I didn't want to. I was always trying to get my father's approval. My mother wouldn't shut up and listen to me, just the normal things. And then what was your typical response in those situations? So if you have a minute to work on those questions for just a few minutes, the rest of this discussion will perhaps be a little more meaningful. Jesus opened his ministry with the words from Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind." Healing the blind was one of Christ's most often repeated and most spectacular miracles. I have a friend who developed serious eye problems as a child. Her vision was 2800, which basically means she could barely read the big E on an eye chart. Without Coke bottle thick glasses, she couldn't read anything from road signs to the expression on her grandson's face. And then a few months ago, a 10-minute LASIK procedure restored her sight completely. She wakes up for the first time able to read her alarm clock without glasses. Unfortunately, there is no LASIK surgery as yet for the psychological and spiritual myopias that we deal with. Jesus taught that he had come not only to heal the physically blind, but to unveil the spiritual blindness of those who thought they could see quite clearly. When the Pharisees asked him sarcastically, "Are we blind also?" he replied, "If ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, we see, therefore your sin remains." The Pharisees and priests were not only blind, but even more detrimentally blind to their own blindness. They not only could not see the Savior for who he was, but they saw him through a glass darkly as someone he was not, a blasphemous, demonic Sabbath breaker doing magic tricks to mislead people. Their blindness to their blindness led them to condemn and crucify him instead of seek him out for healing and sight. Not being able or willing to see our blindness prevents us from seeking the corrective lenses and healing surgeries we need as well. For example, we might not see how our experience on a high school basketball team is skewing our view of the Mountain Meadows massacre, or how our relationship with an emotionally distant mother causes us to misperceive our stake president. We may be blind to the ways we choose the questions we ignore and the questions we think matter, or the options we can think of for answering those questions. Our spiritual and emotional blindness alters our vision of God and affects our relationships with one another. It affects what we perceive as sin and how serious a sin. It limits our ability to recognize the Spirit even when we think we are honestly searching for truth. Even if we are not totally blind, we may be short-sighted or have poor peripheral vision, or be colorblind, or need bifocals that allow us to look at some things one way and other things another way. There are spiritual and emotional counterparts to all of these vision deficits. Of course, there are hundreds of legitimate questions, problems, organizational flaws that deserve legitimate inquiry and remedy, but when we're frustrated or doubtful or questioning, it is at least worth wondering if our history, our organizational structure, our biology, the meaning we give our experience, may be creating a blindness we cannot see and that limits our options for resolving our concerns. As we add self-reflection to our repertoire of coping skills when we are questioning our faith, we enlarge the range of answers we are open to. Some of our blindness is idiosyncratic and specific to certain issues. For example, someone who's upset and confused by early practices of polygamy may think nothing of the fact that Joseph Smith wrote apparently conflicting accounts of the first vision. Joseph Smith Sr.'s drinking may deeply frighten one person while amusing or even comforting another. An interaction with a church leader that frustrates and infuriates me may leave you wondering why I am overreacting. From where each of us sits, our particular questions and frustrations seem not only reasonable, but like the only rational response, unless one is deluded or has blinders on. Yet someone else with a different background or temperament may have a completely different set of sensibilities. For this reason, it helps to consider the personal and psychological, as well as the historical or scientific aspects of issues that trouble us. So today I'd like to explore briefly some of the sources of blindness that might interrupt our ability to resolve our spiritual crises or questions, and some of the corrective lenses we might consider to help us learn to see the face of God in clearer focus. As we look at the influence then of our early experience, we become quickly aware that that experience has tremendous impact on our capacities for spiritual sight. For example, when I walk out into the desert on a clear night, I can pick out a few constellations, but I will never see the stars the way my father does. And they will never have the same meaning to me. I've had people tell me probably 100 times how to find the North Star, the North Star from the Big Dipper, but I can never keep it straight. I can't see the North Star unless someone is actively pointing it out to me. I am North Star blind, if you will. But my pilot father learned to navigate by the stars in the days before radar. He remembers clearly when his life depended on finding the tiny dot of an aircraft carrier in an endless night sea by the wits of celestial navigation. He has 20/20 vision for the North Star, because his prior experience with it is much different than mine. His early experience with the stars is different, and it leads him to a different way of seeing the world we share. Some types of blindness are more common to the human experience than others, like the creeping blurriness of age. Others are more idiosyncratic, like the particular combination of two-directional astigmatisms that plague the contact lens makers of one of my sight-challenged colleagues. But when the explanations about a problem with church history, policy, or doctrine that satisfy one person do not satisfy me, I am left to wonder which of us needs the glasses. Some questions that help me recognize and accommodate to my possible spiritual blind spots include number 7 through 11 on the other side of your sheet. What is the question, issue, or situation in the church that troubles me? What is it about this issue that stands out to me as the problem? What is the problem this issue creates or exemplifies for me? When have I faced a similar problem, and how did I face it? If the church is true, what does this issue make me wonder about God? If I accept the church's viewpoint on this issue, what might it mean about me? So maybe you could write down a one-sentence description under number 7 of a question or issue or situation in the church that has troubled you or troubles you currently. Let me give you some quick